What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an early preview of Menace, an upcoming TRPG from the makers of Battle Brothers Overhype Studio. Now, I'm able to bring you this because their publisher, Hooded Horse, reached out and asked if I wanted to take a look at a demo that they have available, that they've sent out to a lot of people actually, as the embargo lifted for this a few days ago. You may have already seen some of it, but ultimately it's an interesting looking game, and that's obviously why I wanted to take a look at it, but there's a fair few things to know. For starters, from what I understand, this game is shooting for an early access release sometime later this year, in what is left of 2025, that is, so theoretically you should be able to play some of this for yourself relatively soon. However, I did want to point out that this demo roughly coincides with an upcoming Steam Next Fest in the middle of October. So it is my hope, though I do not know this for sure, that people will be able to play this for themselves during the Steam Next Fest, and given that they have this demo available, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't do that, but you never know. Otherwise, let's talk about what Menace actually is. So this is a TRPG, though this demo focuses primarily on combat. We do know a few other things about it already as it stands. So in particular, we play as a strike force, basically, coming from an area of the galaxy called the Core Worlds. Our job is to basically pacify a lawless frontier known as the Wayback System, which is being controlled primarily, seemingly, by pirates and other more local governments that have split off from the normal order that controls the rest of it. And from our ship, the TCRN Impetus, we're going to be doing everything we can, basically, to restore order to this lawless place. Now, the catch is, for whatever reason, communication is cut off and you wind up being stranded here, with your goal basically being to, of course, pacify the system, which we're obviously going to do through force, which basically means tactical battles in this particular sense. And while that will eventually come to include things like managing your actual base, which is the ship, having conversations and things with the individual squad leaders, which from what I understand will be pulled from a giant pool of recruits every time you go to basically play through a game of this, while also having to manage your relationship with the various factions that are in rough control of the general area. So with that in mind, basically everything you're going to see here is a mix of things like procedural generation with stuff that is more handcrafted, like the squad leaders apparently. But as I've already mentioned, this particular demo was focused primarily on the combat, so that's much of what I'm going to have to talk about for the rest of this. Though I do want to start off with a bit of my own feedback about this demo, and that is that basically every map I have been on, it was just way too big. I spent a significant amount of time just trying to run around and find enemies, outside of the rare mission scenario where they would come to you. But with this being a demo, it's hard to say how this will actually end up in the long run, and there may well be plenty of systems that just aren't implemented here. Like, for instance, I didn't see any mechs, which I know from some of their preview materials are in, so that's worth knowing, I suppose. But a big thing about this game is that individual missions are not a singular tactical mission, but rather you take on operations, which are a set of missions, almost kind of roguelike style, but not exactly, in which you'll have to carefully plan out and execute these in a row, with the very real possibility that squad leaders and the people who make up those squads permanently dying along the way. So that's stuff you've got to watch out for. But ultimately, each mission starts at the mission select screen. You basically get a preview here of the things you want to do in terms of which mission to take on, but then there's the actual prep stage. You'll get a rough overview, sort of lay of the land of the map and where the general enemies will be at the beginning of it, and this is where you can actually move your individual squads around, choose which squads to bring, for starters, outfit them accordingly, and then set them up in the deployment zone. Now, what's interesting about these squads is that they are handled as squads in terms of equipment and things, but they are nonetheless made up of individual members. Each squad can have a total of up to 8 individual members, and the thing is, these squaddies, as it calls them, are in fact actual people, and if they die, they are permanently dead. So they are both a resource in the more general sense, but also individual people. I'm curious to know how much the individual people part of it will play into it, because from this combat demo, it didn't really seem important, outside of just keeping them alive to keep your numbers up throughout the operation, of course. Outside of that, each squad leader, more or less, can be promoted, and as you complete missions successfully, you'll get a rating based on how well you did, and this earns you promotion points that are then, as a pool, spent on promoting all of your guys. This will let you take on various perks of different tiers to help that squad do better, of course, and that's in addition to the equipment loadouts. You can basically pick a normal and heavy weapon, alongside potentially take on a bunch of consumable type items and choose what kind of like armor and things you want that squad to wear. Now, all of that costs a total amount of supply resources from you. Best I could tell, this was like a set number you had access to, and then each mission you could basically customize up to the limit of the supplies that you have access to. So basically you have all these resources and you have to, the best you can anyway, divide them amongst your individual squads and hopefully keep them alive throughout the series of missions. Now, another interesting thing is that vehicles, mechs, things like that seem to be at least a somewhat significant part of this. In this demo, you have a squad that has a vehicle that you can actually load up, and that's obviously going to help with mobility a lot, and I do want to stress that in particular because, as I mentioned, these maps are somewhat big, and my hope is that maybe you'll have access to like more vehicles and stuff for these squads that help alleviate that in the full game. And then, of course, you can also mount weapons and things like that on individual vehicles and even use them in combat to a degree. Now, when it comes to the actual turn-based side of things, mostly what you would expect. You can take cover with your squads around the various things on the map. It will kind of give you a rough idea of how much cover is on any given side of that square, and then obviously they can do things like flank you or use more destructive methods to attack your positions via things like their own vehicles, grenades, rocket launchers, the usual stuff. And probably the biggest thing to note here really is that little yellow bar at the top of each individual unit's sort of status, if you will. They have their obviously total health pool and armor for the squad. However, that yellow bar is actually essentially like a morale bar that as it gets more full, as you're getting shot at basically, you can start to be suppressed or pinned down. Pinned down basically steals that squad's turn, whereas suppressed just seems to take some of their action points away. But every turn on your turn, you get about roughly 80 or so action points to spend on either attacking or, of course, moving. Now, you can do things like take a knee or get down to prone, which also requires action points, and that is obviously going to make you make more effective use of the cover you find. But based on the weapon loadouts, you can also make attacks, and each individual weapon seems to have a few options in terms of how you attack. And while they say this is a pretty limited selection of weapons you have available to you in the full game, there will apparently be a bunch of different weapons that, of course, in combination with all these different attack modes, will likely be, I would say, a not insignificant portion of some of the combat depth, as some of it's more useful for pushing through armor, that kind of thing. Now, in addition to all of that, your base is not just sitting idle. There will actually be some strategic options available to you per mission, such as a plane doing a strafing run for you. You can also launch a missile strike of some description, and that can be useful, of course, to get the advantage on a particularly difficult to uproot group of enemies. Now, while you're doing all of this, you of course have to look after your guys, and as you would probably expect from the studio, it's not exactly a super forgiving experience. It's going to be very punishing if you fail or mess something up. You're going to lose a lot of people are going to die, you're not going to be able to recover them. Though to that end, what I am actually really curious about is in the full game, how punishing is that going to be? Like, will you be able to fail a couple missions and keep going, or is it possible that like a single catastrophic failure is basically the end of the run? Which may well be the case given kind of how they've laid out some of the individual mechanics that they've talked about, but as of now, it's just not something I know for sure. And if that does wind up being the case, then this may well wind up being more of a niche experience for people, but probably not wildly surprising on that front. But putting all of that together, I think this is obviously looking to be a pretty interesting game that, as somebody who plays a lot of these types of games, is certainly of note. Though I would say this demo did what demos are supposed to do, which is, in fact, leave me with more questions that obviously I'll have to play the full game to answer. So, as for today, I think that's pretty much going to do it. Whenever this launches into probably early access, I'll take another look at it and kind of see what is going on there. So if you liked this video or you're looking forward to any of that, by all means, means like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.